The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I am Teresa Papanicolaou. I'm Director of Business Development here at A-Insight, and we're joined by A-Insight's DOT and Occupational Health Services Product Manager. Her name is Kate Silvas. We're both pleased to welcome you to another A-Insight webinar. Today, our partner, SambaSafety, joins us. Samba provides A-Insight with our motor vehicle report, driver monitoring, driver training, and CSA monitoring services. We are privileged to have them join us. This is the second part in our three-part series discussing continuous driver monitoring and related services. Today, we were planning to go into detail on the application of continuous monitoring and subsequent driver risk scores that you can uncover with a monitoring program, and how that visibility into driver behavior can allow you to get ahead of safety issues by dynamically assigning appropriate driver training modules, and how organizations can even make use of driver safety training to extend employment offers to drivers who may have otherwise been disqualified. I'm sure that this is a great interest to everyone, especially in today's employment climate. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Amy Wilson, the product manager of SambaSafety. Amy is responsible for product strategy related to SambaSafety's best-in-class training solutions. Amy has an extensive background in product and project management, working closely with customers to understand their needs from a workforce risk and training perspective. Amy, I'm going to hand over the baton to you and lead us through today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody. So like Teresa said, we're here really to talk about that streamlining that process of continuous monitoring and training, the benefits of it. What problems are we addressing, and really how can this help you in your day-to-day to understanding what's going on in your fleet. So without further time, let's go ahead and get started. I first want to talk about what's the problem and how big is it. And we all have heard about this, right? You put people on the road and there's going to be accidents that occur and items that come up. And really the key problems that we are seeing is, the crash and injury rates are actually continuing to rise. I have 10% here on this slide, but actually the Washington Post just came out with a recent article. If anyone saw it, it's now up to 12%, right? So we're seeing accidents occurring, we're seeing injuries occurring, or for all right, sorry, it looks like my mute just went on for some reason. And why is that happening, right? It's human behavior. Accidents happen when you put someone behind the wheel or you give someone power, and now we're enabling them to make decisions. And sometimes they make great decisions, sometimes they don't make great decisions. So we know that human behavior is a contribution to some of these issues. And then we have the compliance piece of this. So 12% of the company's drivers contribute to 50% of their compliance issues. Are they in compliance? Are they reporting out what they should be reporting to their employers? Do the employers have the proper visibility into what's going on within their fleet? Do they understand who's putting them at risk, or do they understand who's not, and how to really leverage that type of behavior? And then the final piece, right, one of the bigger problems is the legal piece. So we know that 1 in 2 personal injury lawsuits involve auto accidents, and they're won by the plaintiff. So not to, use the scare factor and really dive into that, but we want to make sure that we're understanding what are these problems, and then how do we get ahead of it? Can we get ahead of it? And that's where the monitoring comes into play. There are so many different data sources out there, the DMV, claims data, third-party data. And really, the benefit of A-Insight and our partnership with them from a SambaSafety perspective is we can start to take in all of this information and put it in one place. So now we're not going to 5 different systems or getting 25 different email notifications from all of these areas and trying to figure out in our day, where do I start? Instead, we have this one solution that says, I know I can go in here and I can see what's going on. And the other piece that's a benefit of that is data can be a scary word. One of the first things I said to my boss was, data is intimidating and I'm not always comfortable with it, but I want to lean into it. And so what we've been able to do in our partnership is take that information and make it so you can read it. I know for a fact that if I can take our MVR and put it in front of my mom, who's a wonderful person, and she can read it back to me without me walking her through what it means, that's a win, and that's what we like to do. We like to make sure that we give you the most recent and relevant information and make it in a way that you can understand it and know, okay, so John has had a bad day yesterday. He had 3 violations come through. Here's clearly what they are, and we need to have some sort of intervention. Or maybe it's, you know, here is Nate and he is killing it. He has been on top of it. He's in our green. And I know for a fact that I want to make sure that I can model what he's doing with others in my fleet as well. So we're learning those best practices. And that's really the beauty of monitoring. It's making sure it's not just that once a year we pull a motor vehicle record and then we've missed all this activity for the last 364 days. We want to make sure we're updating you on, hey, something's happened and you need to know about it, or something hasn't happened and that's good news. So utilizing that monitoring, providing you with the relevant data and giving you that one spot to do it in, that's the true benefit of A Insight and Samba in our partnership. So as we start to really think about this, right, now I have this platform and I'm getting this information and I'm identifying and I'm monitoring my fleet. So really looking into how are they doing before I hire them, and then I bring them on. How are they doing while they're in my fleet? So that's the key piece of that identify and monitor. We want to make sure that we're staying on top of what they're doing. And then we're managing, right? We're making sure that as we get violation information that's coming through, whether it's via the CSA or whether it's from the DMV or whomever, that we're able to understand it and manage that person and make sure that we're enabling them to be successful in their job, or determining if we need to take a different approach. But then the final piece of that is that modify behavior. So we talked about that at the beginning of this. You know, we know that a lot of times it comes down to decision making and behavior. We know speeding is not good. Like, you can go to a 16-year-old and say, if I put you behind the wheel, should you go 20 miles over the speed limit? Could it be fun? No, bad idea. Speeding is not fun, but we know it's bad, right? We want to make sure that we're understanding that there is behavior modification tools that we can put in place, so then as we receive that information, we can say, hey, let's sit down and focus on how we can educate you. So then that way we're reducing crashes. We're keeping our roads safe. We're keeping our coworkers and our family members, our nieces and nephews safe along the way. And that's really this holistic circle that A Insight and Samba want to be able to provide, enabling you to identify and monitor your people, rewarding those who are performing well, and then helping those who maybe aren't performing as well by modifying their behavior. And how do you do that? How do we go about doing just that? How do we modify that behavior? There's 3 different approaches that we look at this, and really our behavior modification tool is focused on training. And I'm not going to say specific driver training, but workforce training holistically, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And if I were to divide up that behavior modification to 3 parts, it would be remedial training, proactive training, and then what we like to call pre-medial training, specifically focused on the targeted onboarding process. But I want to start with remedial training first. So really thinking about the fact that we have violations coming in and we know it, right? So what should I do about it? Because we don't want to get in a scenario where we're on the stand and they say, you knew that Johnny was speeding, or you knew that Nate was speeding. And I say that because those are my coworkers that I have on right now, but they're wonderful drivers. What did you do about it? Or how did you handle it before you put them back on the road? And that's the remedial training piece, and that's what we have to offer. So now when we are receiving these real-time alerts of violation, we can take that action and say, okay, this person got into a rear-end collision. that could be an indicator of space management problems, and let's assign them a training on space management. So maybe it was a small fender bender, but we want to make sure we get ahead of it and follow up on that action and then take note of it. And that's really where the remedial training can come into play. I'm not saying that training is the end all be all, but it's the first step to make sure that we are following up with our people and giving them the tools to understand, here's the situation that it seemed to have occurred. Let's assign this training and just talk about the different best practices. That way we know that we've covered ourselves, we're showing you that we're invested in you, and we want to keep you on the road. And that's really where that remedial training comes into play. So to quickly address those violations that come through. And then frequent training changes driver behavior. So in this scenario, we've talked about continuous monitoring. And so I also like to talk about continuous training. This is from ATRI. They're very notable, doing a ton of research, and crashes are predictable. So we know for a fact through the research that they've done that failure to yield, you're 101% more likely to get in an accident. So in looking at these types of violations and situations that come up, and then as we look at drivers in our fleet who have had similar violations, we can start to proactively assign them these trainings. If it's a new hire and they've had one of these in their past, we can make sure that we're not only assigning them onboarding training, but targeted training to address past violations, to continue to drive home the fact that we are investing in them and we want them to be safe if they're going to come and work for us. And so that's like a key piece of this too, right? So we're talking about continuous training. This is a way for us to really flatten the curve and what we call the forgetting curve. So if anyone has recently started a job, or even if you've been in your job for 7 years, 10 years, I can almost guarantee that all of us can think about, I remember my first week of onboarding, and do you remember everything you were trained on? No, because you have continuous training as you're starting your new job, and we feel the same way about driver training too. The more that you can continue to assign training, maybe it's once a month or once a quarter, the less likely a person is to forget. I always talk about it when you meet a new person, and there's that rule, if you say their name 3 times, then you're more likely to remember the name. And the same goes for training. We've done the studies and we've seen that continuous training assignment has actually helped reduce safety scores, especially on the regulated side and the basics. And so making sure that you can really think through a training plan and say, okay, once a month I'm going to assign training. Maybe in the winter time we'll assign winter driving training, or maybe in the summertime we'll assign urban training if we're finding ourselves to be in those types of scenarios. But really we know that it can help reduce that forgetting curve and drive home to our drivers that we're investing in them, so when they get behind the wheel, maybe they know speeding is bad, but because of that continuous training and those best practices, they're less likely to actually act on any impulse decisions that they may have around that. So just to reiterate, frequency of training, it's tied to positive safety outcomes. We've seen it, we've seen the scores and partnered with different customers to really see how that's reduced those times. And again, types of regular training can be focused on safety, defensive driving, space management, where we start to really see a lot of our different violations. But there's also seasonal training. So as we start to think about our seasons changing, what should we be mindful of? And then we also have regulatory trainings and specialty trainings, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to make sure that we did have time to touch base on the continuous training. And then the final piece in terms of our 3 parts of training is the hire well and train better. So what if we start to think about applied training to new hires? So we know right now that hiring is difficult. And so we maybe are starting to accept people who have a history that maybe in the past we wouldn't have accepted. What do we do about that? And so in this model, we have a scoring red, yellow, green, and let's say they have a motor vehicle record that has what we would say a score of 10, right? So they have a bad history, what we would score as a bad history, and maybe this is your 15% of applicants, and this is your do not hire category. And then you have this yellow category. So maybe have had some small speeding violations or some small fender benders, and this is 40% of applicants with that blemish driving history. And then you have, your stars, the 55% of applicants. They've got a great driving history. But what do we start to do about that middle figure? If we can start to think through what types of training can I assign this person, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, how can we start to really broaden and open up that percentage of applicants to accept more? And you can do that with targeted training. So now we have this onboarding training of, the general practices of safe driving, but we can also start to assign other types of training as well to address those past behaviors. And again, really get it into their mindset that if you drive for us, if you work for us, we want to make sure that you are representing us well on the road. So as we start to apply that targeted training, then what we start to see is, well, maybe we can change how we accept people. So maybe that MVR becomes, actually, it's 15 plus versus the 10. And so then the pool within the red gets lower and our pool in that yellow area gets larger. We can start to really hone in on that continuous assignment of training to the applicants in that yellow, have more of opportunities and options in our hiring pool moving forward, and then being able to get people safely out on that road. So that would be the goal behind the idea of the targeted pre-medial onboarding training. And so as we start to think through that piece of it, now we can be more mindful about the MVRs that we're getting from folks, how we get them into our fleet and get them onboarded, and making sure that we get them the right types of training. And as we talked through this, at the beginning I brought up workforce safety. We have a variety of training that we can offer. So maybe you have people who are driving from warehouse to warehouse, and not only are they behind the wheel, but now they're working in the warehouse and lifting and pulling, pulling things out and in of different crates. Or maybe it's around food safety. So maybe there's a food delivery process. So we have our training catalog, it's 200 plus trainings, and it really addresses different aspects of it. So of course we have vehicle training, sedans, box trucks, heavy duty tractor trailers, CDL drivers, tankers or hazmat, but we also have OSHA, we also have food safety as well. And then another category too, it's top of mind for a lot of us, especially those who are on the regulated side, is the ELDT entry-level driver training. We have a full category of about 33 to 35 training lessons there as well. So what we want to do is make sure that we give all of our customers the opportunity to address that full workforce risk and safety. So not only what's happening when they're behind the wheel, but what happens when they take a step out of that vehicle as well. And that's really our goal at A-Insight and at Samba, is we want to make sure that we're always making sure you know what's going on, but then giving you the tools to address anything that comes up as well. So at this time, I'm going to take a pause from the conversation and open up for questions.
Unmuted.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a lot of really great information. We do have a couple of questions, but please feel free, if you all did not notice, you can enter your questions into the box there and we can get those answered for you. So far, this is for you, for Samba. How are people notified that they've been assigned a training session?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the training session, once the training's been notified, we do ask for contact information and email contact information when trainings are being assigned. So then what we will do is send out an email notification to the person who is assigned a training, and it will have the details as well. So the title of the training, the due date of the training. We always like to apply a due date because we find that when someone has a timeline, they're more likely to accomplish it with that due date. And it is flexible as well. So we do know that some of our customers, their employees don't have an email address. And so we can also accept, distribution lists. We have a couple customers who do email distribution list, and then the employees can go in and grab their email, or also to managers, where you can send the training assignment to the manager, and then they want to have that discussion with the employee ahead of time.
That flexibility is great. Kate, this is for the A Insight side of the house. What is the turnaround time between a violation being reported and it being uploaded into the driver profile?
Into the driver profile, as soon as we get the report, we would process it and then put it in the file, hopefully within that same day, or even sooner than that.
Fantastic. And Amy, does the driver training programs and allow you to produce certificates that could be used for insurance purposes?
Great question. So we do produce certificates of completion. And so once a person has completed their training, they would actually be able to access that from their own login. And then we can also work with A Insight to provide that as well.
That's great. Along the same lines, does that have an effect on insurance programs? Are there any discounts that you're aware of?
Honestly, it depends on the insurance program. We do know a couple of our partners who offer discounts. And so I always encourage our customers to work with their contact to see what types of offerings they have from a discount perspective, especially around the proactive training too.
That's great information. Are there any type of incentive programs that you can do to recommend for driver scoring within the platform by chance?
Incentive programs meaning better, like if your score is at this point, some sort of incentive around that?
I believe so. I think that's the nature of the question. It was one of the typed. So.
So generally, when I'm working with a customer or talking to them about incentive programs, we don't offer that out of the box, but I have worked with customers and I kind of always default to their safety policy. So I can give a few examples in this case. We have some customers who, when they have a driver that continues to have a clean driving record, they'll do like a driver of the month or an employee of the month and recognizing them for their safe driving. I also had other customers who will go to those employees and ask them to speak to like their best practices and do a training. I don't know if I would personally consider that like an incentive, but it's a good way. You know, we find recognition tends to really continue to inspire those drivers to be and continue to apply the best practices behind the wheel.
Awesome. Follow-up question on the insurance certificates. How long might those be stored in the system?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I haven't seen where we stop storing them. That's a great question, though. I believe that we continue to store them as long as the driver can access the system. So they can access it at any time ad hoc. And then again, we can always go in and provide it. But I'm happy to also follow up and confirm the time to our agents as an FAQ point.
That would be great. We can certainly send a follow-up email. We are recording this broadcast, so we will be sharing the recording with all of the attendees, so you've got a copy of it, and we can send the follow-up from Amy along with that as well. Those are all of the questions that we have. I will say that if anybody that is attending today's webinar is interested in discussing implementation of a continuous monitoring program or training programs, and you are a customer of Applicant Insight, please do reach out to your account manager, or you may contact sales@ainsight.com to learn more. We would be happy to discuss different ways that we can implement programs and different things that you might might need to think about if you've never implemented a continuous monitoring program before. And please don't forget to join us in our final installment with Samba Safety. We're looking forward to that, where we'll really dig into CSA monitoring and then Samba Safety's transportation dashboard. Amy, we want to thank you and the Samba team so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to that third and final installment.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for your time.